morning, everyone. It's Daphne from Scrap and Create, and we are working on page 1 of Graphic 45's Nature's Notebook. And this is going to be an 8.5 by 10.5 by 2.5 inch album. And I'm going to pull that in. I got some feedback from a viewer, which I was like, I love feedback. And so I want to sort of take a note from that, because she had pointed out a couple of things that I don't always go over because I've been doing these for a couple of years. I forget I'm getting new subscribers and new viewers, and sometimes I leave out details. So I'm going to do my best to try to remedy that in my videos. Not go over it in too much detail for those of you that have been on the channel for a while, but enough that if you're new, you can catch where I'm at. So this is 10.5 by 8.5 by 2.5. And I've got a hidden hinge in here. And the construction for the base album is in the playlist. The playlist is organized by the walkthrough, the base album build, and then it's followed by all the detailed tutorials for the interactive components that are going to be placed in the album. Now, having said all that, the cut list is going to be in the description of the video. I also run banners across the video when I'm actually applying some of the interactive components. Now, having said all that, my method is to give you the measurements for all the black or base cardstock, so the interactive component itself, not the designer paper. I don't give you a cut list for the designer paper because people can do different things when they're actually designing the album. They could do color blocking, which would affect the size of the designer paper and how to trim it. I also like a 1/16 inch border. Some people want a bigger border, an 1/8 of an inch. That would affect the size. So if you want to build it as I'm building it, what you're going to want to do, and it's pretty straightforward, is you'll take all of your measurements less any hinge. So in this case, this is 6 by 8, but your finished panel is 5.5 by 8. So you'll take 5.5 by 8, and then you're going to back off 1/8 inch in height and 1/8 inch in width. You're going to center that, and that is going to give you the cut for your designer paper if you want to build like I'm building. Now, in the case of where I color block, I will give you rough estimates, but most of the time my color blocking is kind of a visual, but I'll give you a rough estimate. So I typically try to do things in 1/2 inch increments. So if I wanted to say color block this and do half one pattern and half another pattern, I would want to do whatever those cuts are in 1/2 inch increments, just because it makes it easier to handle in the trimmer. So I'll try to cover that more in detail as I'm going through and decorating in the case that I actually do color blocking, give you some estimates. And I can tell you on page 1, we are going to do some color blocking because there it is. And I'll go over that after we construct the paper, and as we're getting ready to finish this and add our tags, I'll tell you how I came up with that color blocking. Okay, so again, I appreciate all your feedback, and I want to try to incorporate it in every video that comes out to make this as valuable an experience for you guys as possible. Okay, with that, let's go ahead and get started. We have three elements for this page: 2 flaps and 1 pocket. These flaps are 6 by 8. 6 by 8, you're going to score a 1/2 inch along the 6 inch side. You'll need 2 of those. They're going to get applied to the right hand side of the pocket page. Okay, now I didn't do it, but oftentimes, and I recommend doing this, doesn't really matter how advanced you are, it's always best to dry fit. So I flipped it over so the tape doesn't grab, and I'm just checking to make sure top to bottom that it's perfect and it looks good. And the reason I check it is, and let me demonstrate. So this is the pocket page because it's going to be a landscape album, so you want to make sure your pocket opening is to the sides and not up and down. When you add score lines, it actually takes up some of the paper. So even though this is an 8 by 10 pocket, it's best to double check it, because like I said, if when you score, it does consume a little bit of the paper, which can cause this to be off ever so slightly. Okay, so that's in. Now, I want these to open away from each other, and the way I do this, and you know, it's really up to you, but the way I like to do it is I like to rest my hinge on this flap and then remove my tape and then let it fall. And that way I know when I close it, it is it's going to close nicely and not interfere. If I try to place this like this, I put it down and then I try to close it. Sometimes this will be a little bit too long. So this way I know for sure I can open and close these two flaps either way, this way or this way, and there won't be any interference from the edges of either one. And hopefully that makes sense. So I'm going to go ahead and remove my tape backing, the tape backing, not the tape. And then I'm going to rest this on this interactive flap, and I just want to make sure I'm checking top to bottom that it's centered. And then I'm just going to close it and let it find its location, like so. Okay, there we go. So that's in. So that's pretty straightforward. Okay, now the next piece is going to be this pocket, which is you're going to start with a 5 by 5 square, and then you're going to score 3 of the 4 sides. I'm going to double check my measurements. Nope, that's not right. Okay, sorry about that. I was adjusting this, and it's actually 5 by 4.5. So it's 5 inches across and 4.5 inches deep, and then you're going to score a 1/2 inch on 3 sides. So your finished panel is going to be 4 by 4. 4 by 4. So this piece is 4 by 4. So again, 5 by 4.5, and then score on 3 sides. I'm going to set this aside because I'm going to place my designer paper and then add my pocket on top. Okay, so the next thing we should do is make up our mind how we want this to open and close. If we want it to open that way or the other way, and then we're going to place our magnets. So I'm stalling a little bit because I'm trying to think about what's on the opposing side. So I am putting a pocket on the inside liner, and it'll have a flap on the top, which is probably going to hit right about here. So I just want to make sure that these aren't interfering when I close the next page, and it's going to be fine. I think I'm going to do this like so. I am doing solid designer paper here, so I don't have to worry about my magnet placement. Sometimes I want a color block, and if I color block and split the page in half, then I have to really think about magnet placement. In this case, I'm just going to use a full one sheet or one piece of paper to cover that up. Okay, so that is in. Now we're going to put the adjoining magnet on this side. And normally I use a much wider tape to cover the whole edge of the magnet, just to soften it, because the magnets are not mitered. They can have kind of a harsh edge on them, but I don't have that tape handy, so I might I'll have to stop and go grab some out of stock, but at the moment I don't have any. It's not one to grab. I don't think I put enough tape on it. There we go. Just push that into place a little bit. Okay, so that's in. So let's go ahead and do the simple part, which is these flaps. Yep, there we go. Just make sure I've got that trimmed out right. I'm checking my measurements, and they look pretty good. I did most of my trimming offline. I did ink my edges, and I'm using powder puffs in mahogany, which is my fave. I like to use very dark ink on my edges to knock off the white core. If you like to distress into the pattern, I would recommend using a lighter colored ink. But if you're like me and you really just want to knock off that white core, I think dark works perfect. And I think it looks really good with the black. It's something I always do in my black albums because a white core stands out against this black background. But if I'm doing a white album, I think it's a lot. You know, it's really a preference, but it's not really, it doesn't really show up anyway because you're laying it down on a white background. Okay, hopefully you didn't get too much with the top of my head, but it happens. All right, so that's in. And then the papers that I'm using for the top is this one. I think it's beautiful. And I'm going to use a white piece of cardstock just to help me see the edge of this flap. There we go. And that way I can get my paper centered. I'm also using art glitter glue, which we are some places you can still get it, but once the temperatures get below 40, we don't ship it, and neither does art glitter. What do they call? Is it art glitter? So it's unfortunate, but usually what I recommend is to stock up on that early in the season. But I still, as I'm going through, I want to make sure, because I never know when you guys are actually going to watch the video, that I'm talking about my supplies and any things that I'm doing that a little explanation might be helpful. Okay. Okay, and I'm laying it down to dry fit it because this is your chance to either trim it further or verify that you haven't over trimmed and replace it with another piece if you like. So I like to put a little bit of glue on my tape, and I do that so that I can slide my paper into place. If you don't have glue on your tape, it will grab and it will tear your designer paper as you're trying to nudge it into place. You have to cover the whole thing just a little bit. As soon as you press down on it, the glue will spread across the adhesive. A general rule of thumb in my design builds, my album builds, is if it's an interactive component, I use tape to place it, and if it is a static element, like a mat on a flap, it's very static. Nothing. The flap will move, the mat does not. I use glue. Even the best glue over time will tend to get brittle. Tape does not. So again, if it's interactive, you should be using a tape adhesive. And I recommend a score tape. I've used different kinds of tapes. And I highly recommend score tape. I've been building albums for about 5 years now. And we take our albums to our retreats. They get handled a lot, and I have never had the tape fail. So I can't say that about everything. It doesn't mean other stuff doesn't work just as well, but I haven't tested it to that extent. So, okay, now this is going to be the inside liner. Isn't that pretty? I'm going to dry fit these real quick, and that looks good. So this is directional. There's butterflies on it, so pay attention. Make sure you get it turned the right orientation. The other thing I'm using is a tip on the end. This is called Scrap Perfect, and we carry those in our shop, and I don't know how I could use my glue without it. I think it's perfect. Art Glitter makes a glue cap, but you have to have, it has a straight pin in it. And, whoops, sorry about that. I was always losing my pen, And what I like about this is the cap that closes it. It's a lot easier to keep track of than a straight pen floating around on your desktop. So I really like it. You can take them apart to clean them, and I've probably had this one. It's the second one I've ever had, and the first one lasted probably 18 months, and I think they're about $8 a piece. And that's because I wasn't keeping it clean. This one I've had for almost 3 years, so it will last. And then the other thing that happened to my other one is this pen actually came out of the cap at some point. But if you take care of it and take it apart, clean it, it should last. I can't imagine that I'm ever going to have to replace it. Now, having said that, it is important, like I said, to clean it. So the way I manage that is when I go through what's in my 4-ounce bottle to reload it, because I usually get a very large container and then reload. When I'm empty here, that means it's time to clean my cap. Or if I was just going to replace my 4-inch and put this on a new bottle, I would clean my cap before I use my new bottle. It's just a good way. You're going to change, the cap's coming off anyway, might as well clean your tip. And in my tips and techniques, there's a very short video on how to take your tip apart and how to clean it to make sure you get a full lifespan out of it. Okay, again, just checking to make sure my butterflies are going the right direction. They are. Okay, so that is the major design element. And now this is going to go right here. And I do need to trim it down a little bit. And so in order to get this just the way I want it, I rough trimmed it, and I'm going to hand trim it right now based on these 2 little tick marks. And the reason I couldn't trim this out in advance, and the reason I would recommend you don't trim it out in advance, is it's going to be very difficult to predict where this is going to land until you lay it in on top of this flap. So I would recommend leaving yourself, an 1/8 or 1/4 of an inch until you get this laid in and you know exactly where your hinge is going to lay. Otherwise, it'd be very easy to over trim. Okay, now let me take this little bit off. Oops. And the other thing is, if you somehow get your flap in slightly off square, sorry, it's kind of bowed, and I think it's because my glue hadn't dried yet. This is your opportunity to square it up. So if you lay it in, center it up and down, and then put your little tick marks. If you need to put this in at a slant, you can trim this at a slight slant so that it looks square when you're finished. And hopefully that makes sense. It's hard to describe, but if you just made it square and for some reason this went in a little wonky, it might look more like that, for example. But because you laid it in and put your tick mark on either end, you're going to get this beautiful, perfect border. Now I need to ink that edge, and we'll lay it in, and then we're going to add the pocket. And yeah, moving right along. Make sure I've got it in where I trimmed it, and I do. I like to use this Teflon bone folder. It's kind of a silly thing. But the sound of this bone folder compared to this, to me, this feels like nails on a chalkboard. It's always bothered me, and the Teflon doesn't do that. The other thing I like about the Teflon is when you're using the other style bone folder, I found that something about the way it's grazing the paper will leave like a shiny trail, and I don't see that with this Teflon. It's a little bit spendy, but it's a tool worth getting. I like it. I very rarely use the other bone folder because I just can't stand the sound of it. I know that's really silly, but okay, again, I'm going to go over my measurements. This is 5 by 4.5, so it's 5 inches wide by 4.5 inches tall, and again, you're going to score 3 of the 4 sides. This is going to get adhered to this lower right-hand corner, and you may be wondering, well, why did I use a solid piece if I'm going to cover it up with this pocket? And that's going to become obvious in just a second. And I like to talk through what I'm doing and what my decision process was. For those of you, I know some of my viewers copy these exactly as I do. Others, I want them to be able to watch the video and get some techniques or process out of the tutorial itself. So the reason I decided to use a large piece here is because it is going to have a 1/2 inch gap between the pocket and this flap. So I would have had to have put a 1/2 inch strip and then another piece of paper. And I was really thinking that adding a strip and having a black seam and another piece of paper might start to look a little bit busy. So I decided to go ahead and make that just a solid piece, so I didn't have a seam here. And that's the thought process that goes with that. And then I'm going to use this, which kind of reminds me of a honeycomb, which I think is really pretty. And again, I've already inked my edges. Very, very dry in Santa Ana here in San Diego. So when you're working with, in your albums and working with glue, you can really tell what the weather is because my glue is drying really quick. Okay, there's absolutely no moisture in the air. Okay, here I've got a cut apart, which is backed by cardstock, and then I use this little black strip. And this black strip is trimmed off of one of the pages, and it's the cut apart page, I believe. I'll show it to you as soon as I can get my fingers on it. Here it is. Is that right? Nope. It's not that either. It's the one with the ladybugs. Here it is. Okay, here it is. So that little strip here on the edge of this print is what I used here. And I'm using it to make it look essentially like a ribbon behind this, and this is going to get placed right here. Okay, so both of these pieces, both this cut apart is backed by cardstock, and so is that little strip, just to make it pop a little bit more against that yellow. I think it looks pretty nice. You could also just use ribbon if you wanted to have put a little strip of ribbon behind the cut apart. I think that would look nice too. If you are going to use ribbon here, a fabric ribbon, I would recommend placing it with tape, not glue. I think you'll be happier with the result. Okay, I'm just going to do a little bit of nudging to make sure this is relatively straight. I'm going to use my Tim Holtz. Okay, now I'm just looking for a consistent line that's not drifting up or down. That looks pretty darn good. You can also put a cheat line there and erase. I'm really pushing this into place because there's this strip behind it. It kind of wants to bubble a little, so I'm making sure that's pretty secure. Okay, now that is in. Nice little embellishment. A lot of times those are things I do later and not as part of the page build, but when I was looking at it last night, I was like, it needed a little something, so there it is. Now, I'm using 2 tags. This is the stock size tag. This is what's called the regular size. This is the large. Now, what I've done is I've done some color blocking. So basically, I ran this through my die trimmer, then I trimmed off 2 inches of the bottom of this mat, and then I took 2 inches and I didn't even run this through the die. What I did is I just made a rectangle, and then I rounded my corners with a Creative Memories corner rounder, which coincidentally is exactly the right radius as the Graphic 45 tag. Now here, I actually shortened this tag. The stock tag is almost 9 inches, and this is an 8-inch tall tape pocket page, so I did shorten it, and I'll tell you what that is. I wound up trimming it a couple of times to come up with, I trimmed from top to bottom, that's 7 inches. And then I did the same thing. I trimmed off a 2-inch piece just to make this a little bit more interesting. You can just use a solid piece if you want to too. Part of the reason I did it was I've seen it done a lot of times. I think it makes it very interesting. But this pattern in and of itself is very easy to go ahead and add some journaling to, where both these patterns are a bit busy. I mean, I still think it'll be pretty to mat a photograph, but it would be very hard to put any kind of journaling there. So this allows you to add some journaling. For the time being, both of these are black on the back side because I'm not going to try to or attempt to cover these until I've finished my album and know what kind of scraps I have left. Okay, that one goes in here, and this goes right on top of it, like so. And it's nice and snug, and that's the other reason I'm not covering the back. It might be a little too snug. If you want to cover the front and back, I would recommend adding maybe an 1/8 inch to the width, which would make it 5 1/8 inch, and then score 1/2 inch on either side. It just makes the pocket that much wider, so that if you put paper on both sides and add photographs, they'll still slide easily in and out of the pocket. Okay, so before I wrap up this video, I'm going to show you the completed project, and then again our tags. I just think these bees are perfect with this pattern, which, like I said, reminds me of a honeycomb. And that is it for page 1. Thanks everybody for tuning in. This is Daphne from Scrap and Create. If you're not a subscriber, please consider subscribing. And if you are a subscriber, welcome back, and consider sharing our site. We have quite a few subscribers, but we're always looking for more. So if you haven't already, share this with some like-minded crafters. And again, thanks for tuning in. This is Daphne from Scrap and Create. Don't forget, the cut list is in the description, as well as links to the products that you see in this video. I'll be back soon.